Tonight on Newsline, Monday, September 11th, 2023. The September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks claimed the lives of nearly 500 Long Islanders and many brave heroes who sacrificed their lives and safety during the collapse of the World Trade Center 22 years ago. One of those heroes is retired FDNY Deputy Chief Richard Alice. As a member of the FDNY Brooklyn branch, Alice responded to the collapse of the Twin Towers only 20 minutes after the second collapse. As a part of the team, Alice oversaw rescue and recovery efforts at the site in the months after. I sat down with the former chief to hear his story. Just put simply, what was going through your mind when you had to respond to the scene of the World Trade Center?
Well, my day began actually after the completion of a 24-hour shift. So I was a battalion chief at the time in the New York City Fire Department, and my office was in a firehouse in Canarsie, Brooklyn. And so I worked on September 10th, 9 a.m. till 9 a.m. on September 11th. And September 10th, the night tour had been kind of, very busy. It was an active area in the city, so we had a few fires. So the next day, in the news junkie, I was in the office with coffee, TV on, and I'm catching up on paperwork and all. And my wife is at work, kids at school, no rush for me. And the events of the day were unfolding. And initially, what was that it was a commuter plane that had not something that had never happened before in the city. But, with the ensuing information that was coming out, we realized it was a much a bigger event. So with that, long story short, the New York City Fire Department instituted a total recall. That means that all active members of the department that are off duty are to report to their division. There's 9 divisions in the City Fire Department. I was already in my office, which my division is in Brownsville, 15th Division. So we went over there with other members, and everyone in 15th Division responded over there. And city buses were being brought in. And while we're there, it takes a while. We're mustering before a muster site, tools and equipment, waiting for personnel. We're in touch with the command post, so we were kind of like up to date, things that were going on while we were there, made aware of the first collapse. By the time we got on the buses, escorted by the police department to the site, we were made aware of the second collapse. So that was good information to have because, quite frankly, I don't know how I would have reacted if I had been shown up on the scene totally blind. But even with that, we got on scene 20 minutes after the second collapse. And it's funny how your mind works. Your mind can't catch up with what your eyes are doing. And I was prepared for it. But there was no time to process it and all because I firmly believed in my heart that I was now on the scene of what was going to be the largest search and rescue operation in our nation's history. And, due to the nature of the collapses, how they collapsed, pancake form, everything was crushed into the ground. If I had really had time to think, I'd say, well, I don't know how anyone could survive this, but there's always tons of voids and everything. So never in my wildest imagination did I believe that we wouldn't find anyone. So, we went about our job. And sometimes people ask me, did I pause to reflect on the bigger issue of what had happened? No, we're trained to respond to the situation that we're in. And for me, it was a search and rescue operation. So that's how my day started. And literally I was on scene for probably the first 48 hours. And then the UC Fire Department went to a rotational detail where we were working 24 hours on, 24 hours off. And you were either assigned to ground zero to work on the search and rescue operation, or, back in the firehouses, we have 300 firehouses in the city, so we all had to be manned. Me, because I was a chief and a search and rescue expert, I was always assigned to ground zero. So I was back and forth there, and, that's how it played out for most of the month of September. By the 10th or 14th day, was the gradual shift of search and rescue to recovery, which is, again, another difficult transition, but very important for families. And also that began a 9-month operation. And again, it continued, on a rotational basis. So by that time, then to October, I would either spend a little time down at Ground Zero, or I was back at my regular command.
You mentioned as you were part of the team supervising rescue and recovery efforts. Were there any particular saves or rescues that particularly resonated with you?
None that I was a part of. Stories that I heard from people that were on scene at the initial collapse, people that had been trapped, in like a lower level in a stairway that had managed to get out, before we all arrived on the scene. Those were just, lucky situations as far as where they were. But there were no, rescues made once we came on the scene after both buildings had collapsed, especially after the second collapse. But, work was, tunneling and trenching. And that night of September 11th, the heavy equipment showed up. And, I call them the mechanical army that came in, the backhoes and the heavy equipment, construction equipment that came on scene that we needed because of the I-beams, the construction stuff. There was only so much that we could do by using our hands and our hand tools and small portable operating machines.
Just lastly, sort of to bring things into modern day, do you think first responders and 9/11 victims are receiving the attention and the care they need in the modern day? Because there are some bills on the governor's desk. Do we need some more action to be taken here?
New York State has always been behind us. Our problems were always dealing with the federal government initially. So from, I'd say, 2007, which was a year after the first confirmed post 9/11 death of James Zadroga, died of pulmonary fibrosis. And we were fighting with the city of New York, but mostly with the federal government, with what we said the contaminants that were in the air. Don't forget, the federal government had said the air was safe to breathe. I had no doubt that the air was not safe to breathe. But there's a difference between myself as a first responder. I took an oath of office. I signed on to the dangers of my job. I had no illusions about what was in the air. But the innocent victims in all of this is the survivors. That's the term for anyone that wasn't a responder. Survivors, anyone that lived or worked in a downtown area. These people were told to return to their homes, to clean up. People returned back to work. A month later, schools reopened. We have school teachers, we have school children, 14, 15 schools in Lower Manhattan. They've all become sick. So when Detective Zadroga died, Michael Barasch, the attorney that was representing Jimmy, convinced the family to do an autopsy. And when they opened the lungs of Jimmy Zadroga, they found everything we claimed to be in the air. Benzene, heavy metals, chromium, asbestos, silica. It's a toxic group. And that was the forensic evidence that we used to get the law passed. But, it still took a couple of years. And in 2010, these two great programs, which we now have, were established. World Trade Center Health Program is doing a great job. Then the Victim Compensation Fund, which is the compensatory side of the law. But those programs were only budgeted for 5 years. So we had to go back to Washington to fight to get it extended. And then in 2015, we were successful in both. They made the health program, that became permanent. The Victim Compensation Fund, though, was only extended for another 5 years. So we had to go back to Washington a third time. And in 2019, we were successful in getting the Victim Compensation Fund extended permanently as well. So our biggest problem, I would say, is the fact that the federal government doesn't do any public service announcements. So there's two types of people in the World Trade Center Health Program. There's responders and survivors. So it's estimated that there were 90,000 responders from across the country that were on scene. 80,000 of them are enrolled in a health program. And that's because, the agency that they work at makes a point of letting them know about the program, or they're members of a union in their department. That's very proactive. As far as the survivor community, which is a population pool of over 400,000, only 10,000 of them have been enrolled in a health program. So it's 10% of that number is in the health program. So, it's left to individuals like myself and my colleagues and advocates to, I travel the country, I speak to various groups to kind of to let everybody know about this program, and also families that find out, years later after losing a loved one. So it's a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, finally the federal government set up two programs, which I'm very proud of: the health program and the victim compensation fund. And it's critically important because that people lose their livelihood, their illness, compensated for that. When people lose their loved one because they died of a 9/11 related illness, it's compensation for that. It doesn't replace their loved one, but life goes on and bills have to be paid. So yeah, I'd say I'm two thumbs up on both programs.
Really appreciate you coming on, and thank you for your service, Richard.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate that.
You are listening to a 9/11 commemorative broadcast of Newsline on 88.7 FM WRHU, Radio Hofstra University.
To discuss what people are eligible for compensation and the need for future compensation, I spoke with attorney Michael Barasch of the Barasch McGarry law firm, the very same attorney who represented the first 9/11 responder whose death had links to 9/11 toxins, Detective James Zadroga. Your firm represents over 35,000 people who were exposed to health risks during September 11th. What kind of health risks and diseases do you see your clients being mostly exposed to?
So NIOSH, which runs the World Trade Center Health Program, that's the National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety, they have now linked 69 cancers to the World Trade Center toxins, as well as scores of respiratory illnesses. And the proof from this actually came from my client, Detective James Zadroga. Jimmy died at the age of 34, and when they did an autopsy, they found ground glass in his lung tissue, as well as chromium, lead, benzene. These are all known carcinogens linked to these cancers. And we are seeing an explosion of cancers in the 9/11 community, not just among firefighters and cops, but former school children, downtown residents, downtown office workers like the people who worked at my firm. I've already lost two of my paralegals, both at the age of 47, one from breast cancer and one from kidney cancer. So it's truly heartbreaking, and it doesn't end.
There's an act called the 9/11 Notice Act, and it requires businesses that were in the lower Manhattan zone on 9/11 to register under the James Zadroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act. Do you mind just sort of describing what the James Zadroga Act was about?
Well, the Zadroga Act, passed by Congress in 2010 and signed by President Obama in January of 2011, it created the free nationwide World Trade Center Health Program. That's the most important thing. And then if the health program run by NIOSH says you are diagnosed and you are now certified with the 9/11 illness, then you're entitled to compensation from the Victim Compensation Fund. Those are the two programs that were created by the James Zadroga Act. The 9/11 Notice Act is a game changer. I've been lobbying for this bill for years now, and the reason is that 85% of the firefighters and cops in New York, they have enrolled in the health program because their unions have done a great job telling them about it, and that's wonderful. But less than 10% of the 300,000 office workers, the 50,000 students and teachers, and the 25,000 downtown residents, well, they were all exposed to the same toxic dust. They're coming down with the same illnesses. They're dying of the same illnesses, and so few of them have enrolled. And when I speak to these people, and I usually get hired by at least a dozen new people with cancer every day, and I say, why'd you wait so long? Or I'll speak to a family member who lost a loved one from cancer. Why did you wait? The number one reason is they didn't know about it. And if they did know about the ZROGA Act, they thought it was just for firefighters and cops. Or maybe they felt guilty and they didn't want to take money away from firefighters and cops. I can understand that. But I assure you, Congress has fully funded and permanently extended both programs. So you're not taking money away from anybody. You owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family to register and enroll in these programs. And the 9/11 Notice Act will make it so that employers must send letters to their former employees from 2001 and 2002, letting them know that they are eligible. We're not going to reach everybody. I know that. There are companies like Lehman Brothers that are long since out of business. But there's a great expression. Let's never let perfect get in the way of good. This is a really good act. It was passed unanimously by both houses of the New York State Legislature, and I expect Governor Hochul to sign it into law tomorrow. Tens of thousands of people will now learn about the benefits to which they are entitled.
And this should include, that act should include big businesses as well, because if I'm not mistaken, companies like Goldman Sachs and Exchange, they were, present. Are they making pay on their compensations?
Well, remember, all the compensation comes from the federal government. Now, you have to give away your right to sue, which is fine, because at this point, who are you going to sue? It's too late to even sue the terrorists. The EPA did a terrible thing 5 days after 9/11 when they announced the air is safe to breathe. Come back to work, come back to school, come back to your homes. But then Congress did the right thing in 2010 when they passed the ZROGA Health and Compensation Act. So there really is nobody to sue at this point, but there is free health care available. There's compensation. So for those working at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, the stock exchanges, for those going to school at Stuyvesant High School, Pace University, New York Law School, for those working at my law firm, Barasch McGarry, and many of the thousands of other lawyers and businessmen downtown. And I also mean the secretaries, the cafeteria workers. We are all eligible. And this 9/11 Notice Act will require businesses like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Barasch McGarry to send letters to their former employees. So for the cost of a stamp. So I just like to add, tens of thousands of commuters came into Lower Manhattan every single day. And if they were lucky enough to survive and they weren't working in the World Trade Center on 9/11, there are thousands of the people who believed the EPA and came back to work. And they may not realize that their breast cancer diagnosed in 2011, or their prostate cancer diagnosed in 2018, or perhaps their loved one's death from lung cancer, brain cancer, or any of the other 69 cancers is linked, notwithstanding a family history. So you don't have to have lived or been a responder. If you were a commuter from Long Island coming into Lower Manhattan in the 8 months after 9/11, you were exposed to the same toxins that were spewing in the air while those buildings were on fire for 99 days. So even if you're healthy, be each other's advocate and tell your neighbors, your friends, your former co-workers, hey, weren't you working downtown? Weren't you going to school downtown in 2001 and 2002? You may be eligible for free health care. And if diagnosed and certified with a 9/11 illness, you're entitled to $250,000 for cancer. You're entitled to $250,000 for the loss of your loved one. You don't have to give up your home. You can send your kids to college. As I said before, this is a real game changer, and I just hope that viewers will help me spread the word so that no one misses out on the benefits to which they are entitled.
Michael, once again, thank you so much.